You can find Exodus chapter 2. I'm going to start with where we're going to finish today. The last few verses of the passage we're going to be looking at in Exodus 2 say this: "During those many days the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning. And God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew." So before we get to the first talking points question, I just want to ask another question, and that is, how does knowing that God sees you fully make you feel? Like when you understand that God knows every single circumstance of your life before they even happen, how does that make you feel? And that's really going to flavor the theme of what we're going to talk about today. You know, I use this quote often here at Crosstrain, but it says, "What comes to mind when we think about God might be the most important thing about us." Because how does it make you feel like to see the truth of Exodus chapter 2 there, where he says, "And God heard, and God saw, and God remembered, and God knew," and how is that making us? How is that going to make us feel? Because it depends. Like how we're feeling can often have a massive impact on how we're seeing God. Right? Like bitterness towards God is a thing, guys. And we've got to stop pretending it's not. Like whether it's events that happen this week, or in your own life, or in the world, or fill in the blank, guys, we have to stop pretending that this idea of being bitter towards God, because maybe we know Him as the God who sees me, the El Roy. And we're like, okay, God, I know you are the God who sees me, and this is happening to me? Or this just happened in our nation, or fill in the blank. Like that can tend to turn our hearts bitter. And guys, we're in good company when that happens. If you don't believe that bitterness towards God is a thing, you've never read the Psalms. Because a whole bunch of them are about bitterness towards God. And then remembrance of who He is and what He's done, and that eternal perspective. And that's what ultimately matters. So our first talking points question, and we're going to do things a little different today, I think. We'll see, but I'm just going to ask you to think about this for a minute, and then I'll ask for like a group effort in answering this as we participate in the Word together today. But it says, when life feels unfair and you feel unseen, which truth about God most quickly slips from your heart? That He knows, that He sees, that He cares, or that He acts? So just think about that for a minute, because it's going to flavor everything about what we're talking about this morning as we move forward through this passage. When you feel unseen, unheard, unthought of by God, which of these things tends to slip from your thinking? Or which, maybe the reason you're feeling that way is because one or more of these truths have slipped from your thinking. That God knows, that God sees, that God cares, or that He even acts. In that opening passage that I read, there are 4 verbs that are really going to stand out throughout, not just today, but even as I was reading into next week and preparing for next Sunday's message in Exodus chapter 3, is like this is going to pull us forward. So it's going to connect last week as we started this series in Exodus, and it's going to pull us forward all the way through into next week's message. But those 4 verbs are, verse 24, and God heard the groaning, and God remembered, there's the second one, His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So those 4 verbs are going to hopefully anchor our souls today. That God heard, that God remembered, that God saw, and that God knew. It helps us connect, like when we were talking about this idea that like when deliverance seems distant, the darkness of last week, when Pharaoh says, as was prayed, that I want all of the Hebrew children, all the Hebrew male children 2 years and younger slaughtered. Like that's some distant deliverance if you're God's people. Like what is that doing? I love how Daniel said, like what is that doing to the cultural mindset of a people? when you know that, like, and we're going to pick up that step, what happens in that story here, there isn't a Moses story without that edict from Pharaoh, but there's this picture of like what do you do as a people when you know that every boy who is born to you is gonna die? That's got to mess with some psyche. Like, we need some serious therapy after something like that. But it's also going to move us into, like I said, next week when we see that what he says is not only, and this is the beautiful part of, I'm just going to give you the tease for next week, because it's not only next week does this language of God saw and God knew and God remembered, but it also says, and God came down. And that is the gospel message, that God came down. Right? All other religions are us trying to work our way to him. Christianity, which the Exodus story is a beautiful picture of, is the only one that says God came here to do what we could not do. What's interesting about Exodus chapter 2 is it really is, even though if you see, and we've all seen the movies, whichever version is your favorite, like it is, there's so much more here than those movies display. Like, there's so much more backstory to the Exodus 2 story that I hope you don't get lost in the details and see the big interconnected picture of this, because there's a lot of beauty here, a lot of gospel beauty in Exodus 2. Because in Exodus 2, it is the hinge between the complete despair of where God's people find themselves apart from God, and the joy and deliverance and salvation that comes when God shows up, which he doesn't actually show up until Exodus chapter 3. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So as we're looking at today's message, which is, if you haven't figured it out yet, God knows, God sees, and God acts. I was just trying to keep it down to 3 points, because otherwise you guys know I go too long anyway, so you certainly don't want me to have 4 or 5 points. So I was trying to keep it down to 3. So I combined a couple of those words into a God acts. But here's the question we're asking today. Like, how can we trust in the promises of God? And what I mean by that isn't just in some theological way. Well, we can trust in them because he's sovereign. Yes, we teach on that a lot here. We can trust in them because he is the one who's completing his promises and they're about him and about Christ. Yes, and we teach about that a lot here. I'm talking about in the context of where we open. In a world, in your life, in a situation that feels out of control. How can you trust in that moment? How do we trust in the promises of God? That's really what we're going to be looking at. And what we're going to see in this passage, by remembering that he knows, by remembering that he sees, and by remembering that he acts. We have to constantly be renewing our mind with the action of our God. We're going to see even next week, when he chooses the name to reveal himself to Abraham or to Moses, he uses a verb. God is a God of action, not just a proper noun to be studied. So let's look at our first point. God knows. I'm just going to read this first passage. It's the first 10 verses, the first part of our passage today. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about what all the different things we can see here. It says, now a man from the house of Levi, so this is Moses' father, went and took a wife, a Levite woman. That's Moses' mother. And they are both Levites, which all the author here is saying that makes Moses a priest. Right? So he fills the priestly role, because that was the tribe of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. So she was trying to keep this little boy quiet and unknown for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took him in a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And her sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister, the baby's sister, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call your nurse from a Hebrew woman to nurse the child?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the girl went and called the child's mother, which would have been her mother too. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. His name, and she named him, she, meaning we're not really actually sure who the she is. It could have been either one of them, but it's more than likely the princess, named him Moses, even though that's a Hebrew, that has a root Hebrew name, because she said, I drew him out of the water. So here's basically what like this baby is doomed, right? I mean, the baby is doomed from birth, not from the basket. Like the story of this deliverance doesn't open with a thunderclap of God showing up. It actually opens with a baby in a basket. Like this is the first scene we get of like God even really interacting in this moment. And he's not mentioned really anywhere in here. It doesn't say that Moses' mom hid the baby because God told her to. It doesn't say that he hid the baby because in a basket because that was God's plan. This is from the author's perspective, from Moses wrote this, from Moses' perspective, this is all being orchestrated by people. Now here's what's interesting. There's so many interesting things about this scene here. So one of them is that word for basket in this Exodus scene is the same word for the ark in Genesis chapter 5. It's the picture, so right away, Moses is pulling us back to the Genesis 5 account of the people being saved through the water one way. So here's this ark, this baby boat thing, that's part of the picture that we see. But here's something else that was striking to me, because the movies, remember how, like, if you've seen the movies, whether it's the Cecil B. DeMille, Jonathan, what's his name, Charlton Heston, I was going to say Charlton Heston, or it's the Prince of, like, she puts the baby in the basket, and man, this basket is like it's going down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon, right? Like, and we're thinking, man, this baby would have drowned had it not been for God. But God is sovereign, and this is God's plan, which all of that certainly could be true. But here's what's interesting. If you've ever been around, like, water, like and I know Arizona, we don't have a lot of that, but we had this one time where we were canoeing at an uncle's lake up in southern Michigan, and as we got to this area, we were trying to get to where the outlet for the lake was into this river, and it was full of reeds and lily pads, and the girls were pretty little, and we're all in these different canoes, and oh my goodness, you would have thought we were going to die. Like, it's hot, it's humid, there's bugs, the canoe won't go because we're stuck in the midst of these reeds and lily pads. Kids are crying, like it's just like, it's out of control. We see these giant nests like the size of your table going, I don't know what lives there, but if it comes, we're going to die. Right? Now, what does that have to do with the story? Well, what does it say? It says that Moses' mom put the basket among the reeds. Why? Because she didn't want it to go anywhere. She didn't send it down the river. This is more than likely a completely orchestrated event by her that she's let her little girl in on. She's like, hey, over these 3 months that I've been trying to keep this baby quiet, I've noticed that the princess comes down and bathes in this area of the river. So at the time that I know that she comes down with her handmaids and they all go in there together, we're going to take this basket and we're going to put it in the reeds where she can see it. Now what I want you to do, Miriam, is that was Moses' sister, I want you to hang out down there so that when she sees the basket, if she opens it and now she doesn't know what the princess is going to do. The princess could have said, that's a Hebrew child, like she did, kill it. Now this, obviously the sovereignty of God is all over this, but a little different than the movies want to convey. This is ultimately just a mom trying to conceive, how do I save this child? So she puts him in the reeds, and then orchestrates, and my guess is she's talking to Miriam, the mom is talking to Miriam, saying, so when she opens it, you run to her and say, I know someone who can help. Now here's the total God thing about it. Like it's all over the place. But then what happens to Moses' mom? She not only gets her baby back for a time, and that time, by the way, again, the movies kind of convey it almost like it was maybe as long as Moses was weaned. Maybe, we would say it's like 18 months or 2 years. In their culture, it would have been longer than that. But a lot of the stuff that I read, commentaries are saying that it is highly likely that the reason The reason, and we'll see this in a few minutes, Moses knew about his heritage is he was probably with his mom, with that family, for maybe up to 7 or 8 years. And there was probably interaction between the princess and Moses' family throughout that. It wasn't like, oh, I found the baby, because this is how I've always thought of it. Kind of weird. Like, hey, I found the baby. Now you take the baby, and then sometime later I'm going to swing back and I'm going to grab this baby. I'm going to take this baby back from you. But why would she care about the baby? Well, one, there was probably some interaction during that time. Two, oh, by the way, before I forget to mention, what does Moses' mom get as a bonus besides her baby? Money. She's now getting paid to feed this child. So the child is protected, and the family's getting an income. This is a pretty sweet gig God's arranged for them. Now, part of what's interesting about this, and this is not in the Bible, I'll step away from the Bible for a minute, but in extra-biblical history, during this time in Egypt, Pharaoh at the time had divided parts of his kingdom up to be ruled by his 2 daughters. One of them is this one. And it's highly possible that all of this, from her perspective, she can't have a son. This is speculation. I get it. She can't have a boy to inherit the throne. But here's one. She's got something at stake here. It's her own, like her ability to enter into the palace and be the ruler of all Egypt is completely tied to the fact that she has to have a boy. And here one gets provided for her. Like, what an amazing thing. The New Testament, so it was referenced during our prayer time, and I'm just going to, in Acts chapter 7, and I'm just going to read one, it'll come up on the screen in one verse, but you're going to read this passage this week in your daily readings that are in your bulletin, but it says, "And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in word and deed." So at some point, we don't know how old he was, but at some point he transitions to being raised up as an Egyptian. So now he's got this Hebrew lineage that he knows something about. It's going to become important for the story coming up. And he's got this training as a leader, probably as a warrior, certainly as like a general. He's learning languages that are almost impossible for people nowadays even to know. So he's becoming prepared from like a world perspective to be the leader of God's people. But more than that, he is being shown, like for us, more than that, he's being shown as a parallel to the Noah story. He's being shown, oh, by the way, guys, just I know it seemed like a long time ago that we were in the Gospel of Matthew, which it was, certainly the first part of Matthew. But if you remember all the way back, for those of you that were here when we were going through Matthew 1 through 4, what is Matthew trying to very intentionally show us in those first 4 chapters? That Jesus is fulfilling the Moses narrative. It's why Jesus goes out in the wilderness for 40 days. Because Moses was out in the wilderness on his own for 40 years. So were God's people later. So it's fulfilling the Exodus. I mean, even Moses' very life is fulfilling the Exodus story. His name actually means one who draws out. It doesn't mean one who was drawn out. It means one who draws out. Well, what does Moses end up doing? He's used by God to draw God's people out of Egypt. So even as this princess names this child a Hebrew name that has at its roots what is going to be fulfilled in Moses' life. Like we see God's fingerprints all over the place in this passage, including and especially in the light of the life of Jesus. It's why Jesus goes up the mountain. To teach the word instead of receive the word. And we'll get there as we kind of go through the rest of the Exodus story. But Jesus is all over this as well. What I love about this, the way the opening scene opens the most, out of all these little details, some of which I just skipped in the interest of time. You can read commentaries just like I can. You can chat GPT it if you want. But here's what I love. Do you remember how last week we talked about the first hero of the story is not Moses? The first hero of the story was who? The first hero of the Exodus story was who? 2 midwives, 2 women. Now here we go to chapter 2. The next 3 heroes of the story, still not Moses. It's a mom, a sister, and a princess. God elevates these 5 women right at the start of his deliverance story. New Old Testament scholar and Exodus scholar Terence Fetterheim says this: rather than using power as it usually is exercised in the world, God works through persons who have no obvious power. Indeed, they are unlikely candidates for the exercise of power. He's saying of these 5 women. The choice of the 5 women in chapters 1 and 2 entails much risk and vulnerability for God. That risk is real. For these persons could fail, and God would have to begin again. Doesn't mean his plan would have been thwarted. It just means he would have had to start with new people. But they prove highly effective against the ruthless forms of systematic power, and God is not the subject of a single verb in their various undertakings. Do you understand that last part? Like this is him, this commentator saying it is God. Part of what God is showing us here is we have a massive responsibility to be courageous, to act. Men and women, because here we have these 5 women. It is all of this is being very intentionally planned out by God. Right? Who his parents are, they're Levites. Who finds him? The princess. The training he gets, the position he ends up in as the prince of Egypt. We're not going to turn there, but in Psalm 139, you're going to read it this week. In Psalm 139, it was referenced a little bit. John referenced it at the beginning of our time together. But it's like the psalmist, David says, all my days were numbered when as yet there was not one of them. Right? Now, so in other words, what David is saying is, it doesn't just mean the number of your days, like how long you get to live. It does mean that. It also means what's happening in your day to day. I sent to the music team and to John this morning, like one of the best things, like we're going to enter into today as people that are helping lead God's people. We're going to enter in today knowing that God already knows what's at store. Because today has already been planned out. Even as like these 5 women, we have some role to play. So look at your second talking points question. How does being known, this kind of goes along with our first discussion, because this is the sort of the big picture theme for today. How does being fully known by God comfort you or unsettle you? How might it do both? How does being fully known, he knows everything about your plan, his plan for your whole life. How does knowing that comfort you or unsettle you or both? Would you just take we don't have a lot of time, but would you just take 30 seconds, turn at your table, and just how might both be true? How might God knowing you completely make you comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time? Go. Okay, so let me give you a follow-up question just to think about as we continue to move forward. I'm going to give you some time, Lord willing, at the end before we go into communion to really think about everything we're here and talk together about what we're talking about today. But here's a sort of a follow-up question I just want you to think about. What would change if you truly believe God knows your situation better than you do? Yeah, what would change if you really believed God knew your situation better than you did? Because one of the things we have to remember over and over and over again, and while we're going through the Exodus story, not just today but throughout, is we know the story. We know how it ends. They did not. So whether it's a mom putting a baby in an ark basket and putting it among the reeds, hoping that the princess gets to it before the alligator, right? And goes, and she doesn't know how it's going to end. We do, but she doesn't. So how are we going to process through that in our own lives? Because here's the thing. Some of you right now are in one of those chapters. Like you're in that dark, like cold, dark night of the soul. You're in that place of feeling like you're in slavery, bondage, that you feel like God is distant and it's a long way coming before any deliverance is on the horizon. Like we feel, and what we have to remember is God, like brothers and sisters, seriously, God is already at work in your darkest places. You don't know it. Just like they didn't know it. But He is. And someday we're going to turn the page and be like, oh, now I see the rest of the story, just like we get to now. So turn the page and let's look at the rest of the story. So how can you trust the promises of God? By remembering God knows. And then also remembering God sees. So let's look at the next 6 verses. One day, so now here's what's interesting. And this is we talked about this. This is the other piece we have to remember about narrative in the Bible. We just went ahead 40 years. It's a verse. One moment, he's a baby in a basket. We turn the page to verse 11, and one day, well, that's 40 years later, is what the book of Acts tells us. Moses was 40 when this happens. When Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on burden, and he looked on their burden, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. And he looked this way and that, so he's like, okay, who's looking? And seeing that no one was looking, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, so he goes back to the same place, behold, 2 Hebrews are struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered, well, who made you a prince and judge over us? Oh, by the way, he is, actually. Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Uh-oh. Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, now this is interesting, and I'll tell you why in a minute. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Just like that, Moses goes from favored son to fugitive. He is the prince of Egypt. He is on his way to the throne. His biological mom and his adopted mom have got this plan figured out, and he blows it. Why? Because he's impulsive. Just like David is. When Nabal says, hey, I'm not giving you any food, who are you? And he's like, oh man, saddle up, gentlemen. We're going to go slaughter this fat dude right where he is. And his wife, and his soon-to-be wife, Abigail, shows up and is like, don't do that. Don't do that. Or how about Elijah? After he calls down fire on Mount Carmel, and one crazy woman, who happens to be pretty powerful, Jezebel, says, I'm coming to get you. And he runs and he hides. How about Peter? He's in the garden. Here come the soldiers. You told me to bring a sword, Lord. Whap! Off with an ear. Jesus is like, put your sword away. Like, seriously, put your sword away. This is not how my kingdom is going to advance. Don't you know that if I wanted to, I could just, literally when they say, are you the Christ? And he says, I am. What happens to the soldiers? Kaboom! At a word. He could, same thing here. Here's the problem. Moses knew he was to be the deliverer of his people. He knew that from his childhood. He knew that from, how do I know he knew that? Well, because again, in Acts chapter 7, verse 25, it says this. Moses supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they didn't. So what do you understand? He goes and he kills this guy, hides him, then he goes back to the same place. You know what he's doing? Moses is starting the rebellion. He is trying to deliver God's people his way, in his strength, in his time, using his weapons. But he's trying to do what he knows. Somehow he knows, this is what I have been born to do. But the problem is, he's not doing it the way God wants him to do it. Now think about that, guys. Think about that in the context of the events of this last week. We have seen what it looks like to try to win over people, whether you agree with the exact approach or not, but Charlie Kirk, he was trying to win people over with reason. And we see what happens when you're trying to make something happen by force. Guys, stepping away from the Bible, at this point, Moses is more like the shooter than Charlie Kirk. Moses is doing exactly what that guy did. Completely different reasons. That man was taking matters into his own hands for his own purpose. Because I don't know. I have no idea. I don't follow social media. I'm off social media. Free at last, free at last. Praise God Almighty, I'm free at last. I'm just saying that, like, ultimately, whether it's him or any of the other, like the person who killed JFK, or the person who killed, which I know was the CIA, but or the person who, thank you for paying attention, or because they are fully convinced in their own mind that they're doing it for some good. I mean, assuming they have a mind. Some of them are just flat out nuts, obviously. I mean, and at some level, they're all somewhat nuts. But the point is, like, we have to recognize, like, when we try to take matters into our hands, our way, it does not end well. Right? It gets messy fast. God is saying, here's Moses thinking he's doing the right thing. You know what? If you were to ask Moses in this vernacular, he would say, I am here to change the culture. I'm going to bring about cultural change through power. Guys, why does Pharaoh, his adopted grandpa, why does Pharaoh want to kill him? Pharaoh doesn't care if the prince of Egypt killed another Egyptian. They didn't have the 10 Commandments. Murder was not a big issue in the Egyptian world. It was all about hierarchy. He was a prince. The Egyptian was a nobody. He had every right to take his life. So why does Pharaoh want to hunt him down and kill him, like the Bible says? Because he knows he's starting a rebellion. Moses is trying in his own way, in his own strength. Now, what does that have to do with us? Well, it's pretty obvious. And the Holy Spirit already took it there in our prayer time, in what John shared in our in the intro of our time together, that ultimately we as God's people, guys, we have got to show the world a better way. We are not doormats. Charlie Kirk was certainly not a doormat. Right? He would argue with the best of them. Like, literally. Nobody is saying that we just sit back and take it, thank you, sir, may I have another. But we don't fight the way the world. Our weapons are not of the flesh. They are divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. That's what Paul says. And the minute we take up arms in that sense to fulfill God's kingdom, guys, Jesus is not coming back because the United States of America is anything. We're not in this book. It doesn't mean that we don't play a role in the gospel spreading around the world. We've done more for that than any nation that's ever existed. It just means we've got to keep the main thing. And so I loved how the prayer time and just like hearing you guys, it shows a spiritual maturity I know I'm preaching to right now, because we all have Christian friends who are saying the solution to Christ coming back is we got to take up arms and we got to take this country back. That's exactly what Moses is doing. Exactly. And oh, by the way, what does God do to Moses? Well, we're going to see in a minute. He puts him in time out for 40 years. How's that for a plan? You want to do that? Guys, as kingdom people, we are the only people who know what it means to see His kingdom come and His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We gotta not just lead with that. That needs to be every step of the way. Stand for truth. I mean, there have been martyrs throughout Christian history. All the disciples died badly. Nobody said it's going to be easy. But what we don't do is fight the spiritual fight the world's way. And we don't let it get hijacked by those that want to. The gospel is what will change the culture. It's interesting. So here's ultimately what it says, to wrap up this second point and to go into our third point. Here's what God is saying to Moses at this point. It's not just the Egypt I'm working on, son. I'm working on you. It's not just Egypt I'm delivering. I'm delivering you from you. Because Moses is impulsive. He's got anger management issues, which actually cost him later in his life, even after he matures. He is not disqualified. I mean, praise the Lord that God takes imperfect people like murderers like Moses and David and everyone else who's ever followed the Lord except Jesus, right? And he uses them. But ultimately, what we have to remember as individual Christians in America, and frankly as the United States of America, God is not just working on those people. He's working on us. So are we going to let him? And that brings us to our last point. So God knows, God sees, and God acts. And I'm not going to read the passage. You guys were supposed to have read it already. Some of you know the story. This is the scene where, so now he's at this well in Midian. The Midianites were distant relatives of the Jewish people. So the Midianites were people that came from one of the sons of Abraham that was not Isaac. So they're sort of connected, but not really. And this Midianite, in chapter 3, we'll see that his name is Jethro. He has another name that's used here, but he has these 7 daughters, and they're at the well, and these sheep herders show up, and they drive the women away, and Moses defends them because he's been trained as a warrior. So right there, you're like, at least there's something. Okay, now this is a time where you're actually using what you were supposed to do, violence, in a good way because you're defending the helpless. Right? So he's like, okay, so there's an act of his work there. So he's, and ultimately what ends up happening is he ends up staying in this land, in Midian, for 40 years. Because God has him in the perfect place for his preparation. He's with a people that know about the God of Abraham. So they're teaching, like Jethro's teaching him a little bit about God, but they don't know the character of the God of Abraham. And Moses won't know that until God shows up in chapter 3. That's why God shows up in chapter. It's one of the reasons God shows up in chapter 3. But understand, like back to again. Think about this from Moses' perspective. He's 40 when this goes down. He's 80 when we show up next week in chapter 3. He doesn't know what's going to happen. 40 years go by. That's a lot of waiting. There's a book that Mark Vergrop, who wrote Dark Clouds, Deep Mercies book that I've recommended to many of you, he wrote this book called Waiting Isn't a Waste. And I would highly encourage you to read it. I know I gave it to Jamie a long time ago because this poor, one of our missionaries who's patiently waiting to go to Lebanon to share Jesus with people, and yet has, for like how long, years now, right, been 3 years, has been waiting for God's timing. Patient, frankly, way more patiently than I would have. And so I was like, yeah, but part of it is, in the meantime, God's preparing her. In the meantime, what is God preparing you for at the place he's got you right now? Like, don't waste your waiting by just waiting for him. Okay, well, once this is over, Lord, then I'll start. No, he's got a purpose in what you're doing right now. Use it. Like, there was a reason God took Moses to Midian. So look at your last talking points question. Where are you and I'm not asking you to say out loud, where are you predisposed to take matters into your own hands rather than wait on God's timing and God's way? Because ultimately what happened was, and I don't believe that, God's plan was for them to exit when they exit, right, in Exodus, but ultimately Moses was fully convinced I'm the dude, let's go. And the timing was all off, and his approach was really bad. And it cost him. And in the meantime, 40 more years of slaughtering babies is happening. So we got to remember that our decisions have consequences. So let's go back to those 4 verbs, and we're going to kind of start wrapping it up with this. So I said our anchor for today, what we got to hold on to in the midst of a world that seems chaotic, a life that seems chaotic, is God heard their groaning, God remembered his covenant, God saw the people, and God knew. Now I want to just tell you just briefly what those 4 words, so that first one, God heard, it's the Hebrew word samah. It means responded. See, sometimes English isn't a great translation. That word for heard there isn't just, I heard, yeah, thanks for that, I'm out of here. It means God responded. It's hearing, it's like leaning in. Being an active listener is what that word would be in our vernacular. Second one, God remembered. It's the word zakar in Hebrew. It means a divine sense of obligation towards a promise. So when it talks about God remembering, he isn't just, oh yeah. God doesn't forget. So he's not like, oh, I totally forgot about that whole Abraham thing. Wow, I better get back on track. He's saying what Moses is telling us God is saying is, God chose at this time in history to divinely respond to the promise he'd made 800 years earlier. Yeah, 900 years earlier. God saw. It's the word ra'ah, R-A-A-H, ra'ah in Hebrew. And it means something to the effect of, he moved towards the other person with kindness and sympathy. So do you get that out of the word saw? Like, I saw you, Ray. No, what saw means here is like, I moved towards you. Like, I'm coming to meet you. And that brings us to the last one. And God knew, and this is the one that's got Jesus all over it. And God knew. It means to share an experience. God saw their suffering, and he knew. He shared their experience. How is that possible? Because to God, this moment, Exodus 2, when he hears God's people, is the same moment that his son cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? I know what it's like to suffer. Do you see the power in that? So here's the table talk question I want to give you a few minutes to talk about, just together at your tables. So I'm not going to ask for input afterwards. So what did you hear today? Like, what is your takeaway? For you. Like, I just talked for, 40 minutes. What's your takeaway? Like, what did you hear today? Go. It's a joy to hear some conversation going on, and I want to honor your time. I want to encourage you to continue the conversation when we're done at your tables, or on your ride home. It's a great thing to be talking about together. Say, what did you hear today? It's also a good reason to take notes, people, right? Because this question is going to come up pretty regularly at the end of a message, and that way you can at least look down and go, well, what did I write? Maybe that's something I heard. So, just think, if you're struggling to answer the question, I would just, to connect it back to our anchor today, is I would just say, of those 4 verbs, which one is going to be the hardest, which one or ones will be the hardest for you to hold on to as you leave today? Of the 4 verbs that we talked about, that God knows, he sees, he remembers, he acts, like this idea is like he cares. Like, which of those is going to be the hardest for you to remember as you go throughout your week this week? So the music team's going to come up, and we're going to go into our time of response and communion like we do almost every week here. I just want to remind you guys that here's how do we trust in the promises and remember the promises of God? By rehearsing in our minds over and over and over again, He hears and He cares. The psalmists who struggle with bitterness say, "But you have collected my tears in your bottle." Like there's no wasted pain to God. There's no wasted struggles to God. He hears you. He says, "I see you. I see you. And I'm moving towards you." Like that is the story of the gospel. That's why I'm so excited about being in this book of Exodus. There's so much in here. The entire arc of the story of Exodus points us to that. Points us to the cross of Jesus Christ. It points us to a God, Emmanuel, God with us. It points us to this idea. It points us to a God who says to us over and over and over again, "You don't have to doubt that I know, that I see, that I care, that I act. Just look at the cross. This cross is me moving towards you." The only real question is, one, are we going to trust the message and the messenger? And what are we going to do with it? Are we going to embrace it? It meaning the story, His story of redemption. Are we going to apply it to our lives moment by moment by moment because we need to? So as we spend a little bit of time, the trays are going to get passed. If you're a follower of Christ, this is the time for us to tangibly taste of the cross. So I'll come back up and I'll lead us through taking the elements together. But I just want to encourage you to use this time to remind your soul you're seen. Father, I thank you, Lord, for the fact that we are fully known. And we are freely forgiven by you. That's what the cross says. The cross says, "I see you. I've come." Lord, let our hearts come to you in Jesus' name. Amen.